listening to a download from the outdoorstation.co.uk. Number 552.
Hello and welcome back to another podcast on the Outdoors Station, the longest running outdoors podcast in the world, with a specific interest in self-powered travel and ongoing appreciation of the world around us. This is part 2 of my conversation with Anna Richards, relating to her experience of walking the TCT, the Transcaucasian Trail, a 1,500 kilometre plus remote long-distance trail nearing completion, which takes in Armenia, Azerbaijan and Georgia, right over on the edge of Asia, just north of Turkey and Iran. In part 1, we heard how she stumbled across news of the trail, the sharp learning curve she went through following her swift acceptance, and the support of the TCT community. She was one of only a few solo women undertaking the hike, and although approximately 100 other hikers took on the route this year, she only met 4, going in the opposite direction, 3 of which were on the same day. So here we pick up our conversation and hear more about the hospitality of the locals, the overall experience and the practicalities of getting there and back. All the links to everything we discussed can be found over on the show notes on the outdoorstation.co.uk, and a video of the entire conversation with photos and mapping can be found on our YouTube channel. Outside of the US, this is probably one of the fewest accessible hiking trails in the world that incorporates real remote adventure, where you can hike for days unencumbered by technology, relying totally on your own strength of character and abilities, and not see another soul. I do hope you enjoy it, and comments and feedback are always welcome on the Outdoor Station or on our social media. And now, back to my conversation with Anna. Were there many women in the sort of group, or the number of people, the 100 people that actually did the trek? Were there many other women that you spoke to that were travelling solo?
There were a couple. There weren't many of us. So I would say the gender balance of people taking on the trail was probably fairly even, actually. But a lot of the women who were hiking were either doing it in a pair or, with a couple of friends. I think I spoke to 2 other women, one who hikes completely solo, who actually lives in Cornwall, incidentally, and another one who had been hiking with a friend and ended up doing a sort of 2-week stretch on her own. But women hiking on their own, were a minority, definitely. Okay.
And not that I sort of adore technology, but sometimes useful as a backup. Did you have, because it was sort of semi-organised through the people on the TCT, sort of a text ability to just say, I'm here, I'm safe every now and again? Was that part of the sort of backup or the support that they offered?
No, not really. We were all in a kind of a Slack channel group chat. So people were really, really good at, sharing what they thought about different sections of the routes. We stayed in touch via that as well and shared stories. I think I was particularly active on that because I was all alone. So when I had some kind of connection, I was probably quite annoying on the Slack chat. The organisers were definitely very up to speed with who was hiking and roughly where people were. So if you'd suddenly, dropped off the radar for a week or so, I'm sure that they would have noticed, but there wasn't really a kind of, text and check-in because they did expect us to be very self-sufficient as well. I did take a tracker as well. I took a Garmin GPS tracker. And I'm really glad I did. I think, it was my mother who very much wanted me to take this tracker. I was actually very, very happy that I had it
So did you use the tracker, not from a safety point of view, but did you just use the tracker for here I am, I'm safe type of thing? Because you can send brief messages with it, can't you?
You can, and I was very strict with my mum that I would not be sending messages all the time, but occasionally I did send her a little message, and she had a very fun summer watching my little blue tick move across the map of Armenia, but I was happy to have it, actually. It made me feel safer.
And going back to your experience there with the beekeeper, I know obviously it can, depending on the time of day and how dark it is, did you sort of pack up and leave and extract yourself straight away, or how did it sort of finish or close?
I didn't, because it was already after dark, and I was in sort of the middle of nowhere, and I suppose the thing usually being a woman is that sadly you can be quite easily physically overpowered, but actually, especially at my height, that's definitely a factor. But actually, in Armenia, a lot of the men are very small and very slight, and this man was actually only about my height and significantly skinnier than me. And in the end, kind of took no for an answer. I didn't sleep a lot that night. I did sleep with my penknife under my pillow, and I packed up and left very early the next day.
Yeah. I mean, for the Americans listening to this, there will no doubt be people asking, "What did you take a weapon?" But you've just answered that question with a penknife, as much as it would have been if you needed it, obviously. Okay,
yeah, and it wasn't there as a weapon. It was there, it's more for sort of, you always have a penknife on you when you hike. Mostly, I use it for slicing cheese. But...
Exactly, cheese and apple.
Exactly.
Then the other thing that immediately comes to mind is obviously, I mean, I have this vision that it is a very, very remote place. I wouldn't necessarily want to be say it was a poor country, but I should imagine it's not as affluent as France or as the UK. So how did you manage with the financial side of things? Because I assume that you would carry a fair amount of small currency with you. Did people sort of refuse to take any money, or were there cash points at the various towns that you went through that you're able to access cash? How did it sort of work from a practical point of view?
It's definitely a cash society. You definitely don't go around, with your little contactless card beeping everywhere that you go. It's a relatively cheap country to get around as a Westerner. And all of the major towns do have cash points as well. So I set off with quite a large amount of cash because I assumed that I wasn't going to be passing, some cash points as I went around. A lot of people refused to take anything as well. And, I've touched on sort of the dodgy experience I had. So I'd really like to reiterate a lot of the really great experiences that I had as well. I mean, sort of the heartwarming experiences of families who had very little inviting me in and, insisting on feeding me and really preparing these huge banquet-like tables of food. And I mean, usually I don't eat meat when I'm in France. I'm usually a pescatarian, but in Armenia, I kind of felt as though it would be rude not to eat what people were serving up, because people would have gone and shot a pheasant and they'd have prepared it for me, or they'd have roasted a whole chicken or something like that. And they really didn't want to take anything from you. People were so hospitable, and some days, I mean, it can be very remote, but there's also parts where you go through a lot of villages in quick succession. And on those occasions, it almost became a bit like a food and coffee marathon, because every village you pass through, people would want to welcome you in, they want to feed you. And, you'd honestly get to the point where you're like, well, I really can't eat anything else. I'm going to be rolling down the mountain soon.
I was going to ask about the from their point of view, what did they want to know about you? What were they interested in?
If I was completely crazy, I think was a lot of it.
Married, I suppose the second question.
Married would be yes, would be a lot of it. So, frequently, depending on who was asking, frequently I suddenly became married, and then they want to know, why my husband wasn't out there protecting me, walking with me. No, the question I got a lot was menac, which means are you all alone? And then, why? What are you doing? Why are you doing this? But a lot of the time, they just they want to know what you thought of Armenia, what you thought of the people, what you thought of their food as well, which I have to say is incredibly good. I didn't know a lot about Armenian cuisine before I went out there, but it's really good. A lot of it's kind of in excess, which is perfect for a hungry hiker. There's a lot of fresh vegetables. So I suppose those are the sort of questions that I got.
I remember speaking to Jenny Tuff, who did some epic adventures as a solo woman as well, and she would often say that the female of the family or the group or her she met rurally would be very, very protective and take her under the wing, and even though she was like you trying to get on, and generally they were very supportive, and she gave the impression that when she left them, they were all thinking, well, I would like a little bit of freedom. I'd like to be able to do something like this. Did you have any sort of experiences or any sort of body language that indicated that the women or the younger women or the children even thought what an exciting thing you were doing, or was it just completely out of their scope?
Yeah, I think that there was a lot of bewilderment about it rather than that's something that I would really like to do. I think a question that I got a lot from the women was, are you scared, or are you ever scared doing this? And I was like, well, yeah, sometimes, sometimes it can be quite scary. But I think a lot of it was kind of sheer confusion. And a lot of people said to me, they were like, hey, don't worry, we can drive you to the next town. It'll be much quicker, just get in the car. And I was like, no, this isn't, the idea. But I think that hiking is not big in the culture in Armenia, which is crazy because, they've got these epic landscapes that are, an absolute hiker's paradise. But hiking, whether as a woman solo or, anyone, it's not in the culture, so they just think, well, why wouldn't you get in the car and go there? You'll get there a lot faster.
Yes, but what on earth are you walking
for?
Absolutely. The other thing is obviously any sort of long distance hike, we're obviously referring to American PCTs, you have these flesh pots that you go through, like you say, towns and cities or villages or whatever else, and pick up from supplies. You obviously had help from the TCT people about where to send parcels to. But what about practical things like camping equipment? If some of your equipment broke or you wanted to replace something or top up with gas, did you find replenishment fairly easy from that point of view?
So I did have some mishaps in my gear as well. I'm so glad you asked this question. I mean, in terms of topping up with gas, that was one thing that I vastly overcased on because I think probably I got fed a lot more regularly than I thought on the trail. So I packed far too much camping gas and I sent far too much in resupply packages and ended up sort of leaving it wherever I could. In terms of sort of broken gear, I snapped a tent pole literally on night one, which was not ideal. It was probably some of the harshest winds that I had the entire time, and I managed to mend it with the help of the repair kit that I had. And a farmer who had a huge amount of tools, so we managed to use the repair kit to fix it. But I did have about a week where my tent pole was just splintered and I was really dreading, what if I hit a really big storm. I also had a punctured sleeping mat, which I think I punctured around the seal, and to be fair, it was a very cheap sleeping mat that I've had for about 5 years, so it had very, very good innings. And it was such a sort of slow, small puncture that it just meant for the second half of the trail I was waking up every hour or two and kind of re-inflating my sleeping mat, because there's not a lot of hiking and camping gear shops in Armenia. The only ones that are in Yerevan, and I could not find this puncture in the mat. It must have been so small all around the seal. So, I tried sort of immersing it in water and everything. I couldn't find the puncture. So, yeah, I just I just woke up every couple of hours and reinflated it, and then woke up on the ground again a few hours later. So it wasn't ideal, but it worked.
Okay. So in other words, anybody undertaking this route need to think about the durability of some of their equipment. It may not necessarily have to be the lightest, but we'll come on and talk about equipment in a second. We've obviously talked about some of the negative sides and the security, but let's just be positive for a minute and tell me a handful of your absolute best moments that you'll remember forever.
There were many of them as well. So I probably should have led in with some of these positive moments. I mean, the very best part of the trail for me was the Gegum Mountains, which was described as the remotest part of the trail because you go through about 100 kilometers where you don't pass any villages. So you have to be kind of entirely self-sufficient. But what you've actually got up there in hiking season is a lot of nomad camps. So you can see them sort of dotted around the landscape. You see these sort of nomadic yurts, and it's just a crazy insight into a complete other way of life. And people invite you into their yurts to look around. And in terms of landscape as well, it's incredible because it kind of plateaus. So you climb and climb and climb to get up to the Gegums, which is largely above 3,000 meters of altitude, very, very exposed. And then it kind of flattens out. So you've got, these sort of old volcanic craters and mountains, but actually where you're walking once you're up there, it's very, very flat. So you can see for miles and miles in every direction. And it's just mind blowing, because there's all of this untouched landscape, and other than the nomadic camps, there's no one around, there's no trail, but this part's easy to navigate because you can see sort of exactly the direction that you're going in, and you've got this like wide open feeling of space, but it's not oppressive at all. It's kind of the sort of space that makes you want to kind of fling your arms around and run around it all, and it's beautiful. It's really, really beautiful. And other than that, I mean, there's a lot of variety as well. I mean, it is incredibly arid, but there was some crazy scenery in an area called thru, which was a week or so before I hit the Gegums. And that's kind of an area where it's a lot of very arid gorges, it's a lot of very remote monasteries. And the name of it, thru, actually translates to Valley of Woes because it's so dry and arid. But it's wild as well. I mean, I've never been to sort of the canyons in Utah and places like that, but I imagine it would look a little bit like that because you've got all these crazy colors in the rock. It's it's kind of fiery looking. It's very inhospitable looking, but very dramatic and very beautiful.
So would you return? Would you return to the sections that you sort of missed? Because you did a couple of long sections, but you skipped a couple of bits. Was that because the trails were not open, or was it weather or something?
It was time constraints mostly. So I wanted to hike across as much of Armenia as possible in the 4 weeks that I had to actually walk. And it's 827 kilometers. It wasn't possible to do all of that in 4 weeks, especially with the sort of terrain that I was covering. So to start off with, I kind of set off, very religiously, like, well, I will just start from the southernmost point and I will see how far I get in the 4 weeks. But then actually there are sections where, you join a bit of road. There was one day where I was on kind of a tarmacked road for most of the day. You're getting sort of inspiration from people who've done other sections and you think, God, that bit looks really gorgeous. And I thought, well, why am I, sort of doing this so religiously that I have to start from the southernmost point and just see where I finish in 4 weeks at the risk of actually skipping some of the better sections as well. So I walked from Megri to a place called Noravank. I then hitched from Noravank to a place called Shatten. walked from Shatton to a place called Sevan, which is on the massive lake shore in Armenia, and that took me through the Gegums. And then I hitched to Dilijan, and I did a final stretch from Dilijan to a place called Tamanyan, which was just a 3-day stretch at the end, which was a beautiful, beautiful stretch as well. And if people are, traveling around Armenia and they're just looking for, a couple of days of hiking, I'd really recommend that stretch between Dilijan and Tamanyan, because it's still, fairly physically challenging, but you pass some epic monasteries, you've got crazy limestone cliffs, you pass little villages where people were probably the most hospitable of the whole trail there. And yeah, it was insanely beautiful around there.
So a couple of quick questions then before we actually get on to specifics about any equipment for the gearheads that would like to know exactly what you took. How easy is it to get there and get back, flights, and also what sort of money did you get through as part and parcel of doing the trip?
So flights don't go direct from the UK. I flew with Pegasus Airlines, and they go via Turkey, Istanbul usually. And they've got flights going several times a week. So they're pretty easy and convenient to get in and out. And they're very reasonably priced airline as well, usually. From Lyon, there's actually direct flights going. But I had weddings in the UK, either side of the track. So I hence going sort of in and out of London. In terms of sort of money that I got through, it wasn't expensive. And, when I passed a guest house, I often stayed in the guest house because it was very hot for a lot of the trip. It was very, very dusty. And I was very happy to spend extra to have a shower or, to have a proper meal rather than, kind of instant dehydrated meals when I could. But I mean, in terms of the whole thing, I think, even with a little bit of time either side, I'm really not stinting myself. I think in Armenia, I wouldn't have spent more than £1,000 the whole trip. And that was with having, a few days in the Yerevan at the start, having a few days at, a really nice campsite with a pool at the end. I mean, generally, if you come across a guest house in Armenia, in somewhere fairly remote in the middle of nowhere, it's going to cost you in the region of about £10 with a meal. So yeah, it's really not much at all.
Okay. And for anybody looking at this now seriously in the UK, the exchange rate as we speak at the moment seems to be 2 to 1. So if it says 10, what's the actual currency?
Oh God, I've forgotten. That's terrible, isn't it? I was using it for a month and I can't even remember what the Armenian currency is. I've still got some in my purse as well.
Well, anyway, it's two to 1.
That.
So if you see 10 units, it's actually £5 roughly, to give you an idea. Seems to be the exchange rate. Okay, so for the gearheads, myself included, just a quick rough down idea of what you took. It sounds like you travelled fairly lightweight anyway. And obviously we always like to know the best piece of equipment and the worst piece of equipment. Not necessarily because it failed, but just actually it was useless.
Yeah, sure. So I try to travel fairly light, and I do have quite a lot of lightweight gear. But I'm definitely not kind of one of these like ultra light fans who sacrifices comfort to just reduce the weight of my pack by a few grams. I know that some people will cold soak all of their meals and things like that. I definitely didn't do that. And I think also when you're spending that amount of time on your own, there probably are a few comforts that you want. Like I took a little lightweight coffee press so that I could have proper coffee when I was hiking around for a month on my own. And I'm glad I did. It was luxury that I really appreciated. In terms of sort of the best kind of most helpful gear that I took, I'm going to make you uncomfortable here, but as a woman, I think that, one of the very best pieces of gear that you can take is a menstrual cup for through hiking. It's absolutely invaluable, dramatically reduces the amount of waste that you have to carry as well. I had some really good clothing on this trip, like real good kind of moisture wicking clothing. I was gear testing a few things, and one that really stood out, I had this top from a little brand called Iron Roots, which is a small kind of ethical brand that make their clothing using eucalyptus. And it was fantastic for moisture wicking. It was fantastic for temperature regulation as well. And I wore this top day after day. And I don't think I smelled too bad. I mean, I didn't really cross many people who could have told me otherwise. But really, I think, it stayed pretty fresh for the amount of time that I was wearing it and the amount that I was sweating into it. And in terms of the worst gear, my battery packs were terrible, and I would invest in a solar power battery pack next time, because I had cheap little battery packs, and I was using the GPS a lot, because there's no physical maps of the route, and most of the route is completely unmarked. It wasn't obvious where you were going at all, so you were quite heavily reliant on an app with GPS, which drains your battery a lot. So I was using my phone a lot more than I would usually use it on a thru hike. And the cheap battery packs that I had were rubbish. And if I was going to do it again, I would take a good solar charging battery pack.
Okay, so just to narrow that down then, on the battery pack front, for somebody doing something like this, were you charging a GPS? I mean, by the GPS, do you mean your phone or the Garmin system?
My phone. I mean, the Garmin holds battery life for a really long time, so that was fine. But I think any smartphone, I wouldn't say that my smartphone battery life is particularly poor. But if you're using the GPS on it all day, the battery goes down pretty quickly.
Okay. So were you able to charge your battery pack when you got to the guest houses or whatever? It was not necessarily a problem. I'm just thinking about the amount of equipment we all take, that's all.
Yeah, so at guest houses, I could always charge my battery pack, or if I went to a campsite. The last 3 days of the trail, I actually, I thought that I would go really, really ultralight for the last 3 days. And I left quite a few things, including my coffee press, at the hostel in Dillajan. And I forgot my battery pack, and, set off on day one, happy as anything. Camped that night, and then realised that I'd forgotten my battery pack, and that, my phone was not going to make it through 3 days. And I ended up charging my phone. I came from a little farmhouse belonging to a pig farmer called Saka, who's one of my favourite people I met all trail. And he very kindly charged my phone up for me, which kind of shored it up for these sort of last couple of days, rationing it off the track. He also fed me an absolutely enormous meal, fed me what I thought was apple juice, tasted like it, turned out to be homemade brandy, so I kind of was rather woozy, kind of winding my way along the trail after that. And then the nicest thing was that on the following day, so I met him on day 2 of the final 3-day leg, I was walking through a little village, and I suddenly heard somebody call out my name. And it was Saka, the pig farmer, who was in this village visiting his brother who lived there. And he saw me coming through, and he was like, Anna, and started saying, Nahajash, which is breakfast. And he was like, come on in. And, invited me into his brother's home for breakfast. And suddenly the whole spread came out. He was like, give me your phone, I'll charge it up again. Fed me huge quantities, tried to feed me vodka for breakfast as well, which I declined. And waved me on my way. And it was a lovely, lovely way to start what I knew was my final day of walking, with kind of this whole entourage coming out of the village and all of Saka's family waving me off, with far too much food, more than I needed for the final day. So
all that apprehension you had right at the very beginning, just have a nice ending like that. You're well truly tuned in to the people and the country. Yeah. Okay, well, I think you've been a fantastic guest, Anna. Thank you so much for being so entertaining and also so informative about something that's so fresh and exciting. I got very excited looking at it. I'm sure a lot of people will be following this link to and feeling exactly the same and thinking about the options. So it's definitely a proper trek, a proper hike, and definitely has the remoteness to it. Now, I do like to have a final question, and it's always a good one to see how people react. So of all the things I could have asked you about this particular adventure that you've had, what should I have asked you?
That's tricky because I think you've asked a lot of really good questions. Because we've spoken about the landscape, and I've been able to sort of describe the most gorgeous parts of the hike, and I'm really glad that you touched on the safety aspects as well, and kind of how I felt hiking, because mentally it was very challenging. I don't know. I maybe say if people are planning to do this hike before, if they're planning to do this hike, in the future, like who is it for, and what to be aware of. And I think I would just be aware that just reiterate that the hike really is in its infancy, and that comes with some immense rewards as well. You go on a hiking trail, like, for example, the GR20 or the Annapurna circuit, sort of thinking about sort of other long distance hikes that I've done, which are spectacular, and the scenery is absolutely amazing, but you don't get that feeling of solitude. And on the Transcaucasian Trail, you really do get that solitude, and you kind of you get that sort of almost explorer feeling of that you feel a little bit like you're the first person seeing a place, and at times it's incredibly frustrating. I think that's the payoff for doing something that is so is so brand new. But at times it's incredibly rewarding, and you kind of, you feel as though you're the first person getting to do something, even though obviously you're not. And this has taken years and years of painstaking planning from the people organising the TCT. But for the right people that have hiked a lot, it's an incredibly rewarding experience.
Is there anything particularly that you feel you should have taken? There's something that you missed, just as that we haven't touched on at all, that would have been really useful?
Actually, no. I think this maybe comes from probably sort of over planning a little bit, because I took too much gas. I took too much food for most of it as well, because I didn't anticipate how much people would feed me. I think that the main thing really would have been the battery pack. And other than that, the thing that I really didn't use much in my backpack was my raincoat. But I mean, I'm glad I had it with. I had one day of rain in an entire month. I was incredibly lucky with the weather. I didn't experience like a lot of storms. I had some high winds, but no kind of really bad storms. So my raincoat was kind of languishing unused in my backpack most of the time. But that being said, I wouldn't have left it out, because guaranteed if you don't take your raincoat, it would have pissed it down multiple times during the hike. So no, really.
Brilliant. Well, Anna, thank you so much indeed for your time. It's been absolutely a great pleasure to talk to you. Do you have any final thoughts or any more routes you're going to be pioneering, or are you sitting comfortably in Lyon for a quiet?
So I'm definitely going to be in Lyon for the foreseeable future. I mean, sort of work commitments that I've got. I've got some long-term projects that are going to keep me quite firmly in France, I think, for the next year or so. But there's some incredible hiking in France, and the next long distance hike that I'd really like to do, which will probably seem very civilized after, not very remote at all after Armenia, is a hike called the Tour des Écrins, which is a loop in Écrins National Park, national, I think, not regional, in the Alps. So it's probably about a 2-hour drive from my house. I reckon it's probably going to be about sort of a 6-day loop or so. But I'm going to be waiting to do that when the weather gets a bit warmer. I think it'll be day hikes for the time being, as we're coming into winter.
Well, fantastic. Well, I wish you the best of luck and safe travels on that. Thanks very much indeed for your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
So, did you enjoy that? Has it got you thinking about next year and perhaps stepping out of your comfort zone? My thanks to Anna, who, as you can tell, enjoyed the challenge and wanted to share her experience. I'm putting together a fairly eclectic range of content for you to keep things interesting as we get back up to speed with podcasts, videos, and live streams. So please subscribe, like, and write reviews on iTunes to support the station. It would be greatly appreciated. All the links to everything we discuss can be found on the show notes 551 and 552 on theoutdoorstation.co.uk, and of course the full-length video is now on YouTube on the same name. Okay folks, well, it's good to be back, and I look forward to reading your comments and getting feedback as things progress. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To hear or see more from our extensive free library, please visit theoutdoorstation.co.uk.